Welcome back. We're going to end the course by talking a little bit about the wage structure. So instead of talking about individual firms or individual workers like we had been throughout the course, we're going to focus on the difference in wages between workers across the entire labor market. Early on, in our model of the labor market using a simple supply and demand framework, we assumed that all workers earned the same wage and that all workers were exactly alike and all the firms and the jobs within those firms were exactly alike, just for simplicity's sake. But later on, we show that this wasn't true. In this chapter, we're going to discuss some more of the causes of income inequality and see what the trends of income inequality over time. In a labor market with multiple careers and firms and workers with varying level skills and interests and education, there's going to be some differences between wages that workers earn. Some workers are just more productive than others. I have colleagues who can do twice as much work in one day that I can. It's just insane to watch them work. And some skills out there are more highly paid than others. You could be a world champion toe wrestler. Yes, that's a thing. And you would still make less than a typical accountant because accountants are more valuable than wrestlers. They provide more value, so they end up being paid more. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about both of the causes. So we're starting this discussion of the income distribution by looking at the age earnings profiles. So essentially, how workers' earnings change as they grow older. This topic ties back to concepts from before in the course, like human capital, education, and wage determination. First, we see that more educated workers earn more on average. Now, why is that? Think back to the human capital. Higher education acts as both a signal and it's an investment in skills that are rewarded in the labor market. This difference often starts right after the workers enter the labor force, creating a wage gap between education levels, which then persists over time. Next, earnings increase with experience, but eventually they do so at a decreasing rate. What that means is that early on in a worker's career, they're gaining on-the-job experience, they're undergoing some training, they're building up these skills that boost their productivity. As they increase their productivity, their earnings tend to reflect that. However, as workers start to age, they typically reach a point where the returns to the additional experience begins to diminish. So at first they get these huge increases, but then they slow down as they get older. The growth in earnings slows, reflecting that these fewer new skills are being developed and acquired, and possibly even reduce physical productivity in some occupations where, actual heavy lifting is involved. So the age earning profile of different education cohorts diverge over time. They fan out. This is an important pattern. So over time, the earnings of more educated workers tend to grow faster than those of less educated workers. And why is this the case? Workers with higher education often have more opportunities for promotion, more opportunities for skill development, or more opportunities for entry into higher paying occupations. They may also have access to fields with steeper earning trajectories. As we talked about in the post-school investments and human capital, keep in mind that these age earnings profiles help explain why income inequality exists across education level and how individual decisions about education, on-the-job training, and careers all affect lifetime earnings. So here's graphically the age earnings profile. So this one is for men, but your textbook shows both side by side, and men and women follow the same trend. We can see that early in their career, wages increase more sharply as younger workers are building human capital more quickly, they're willing to spend more time on training, and the experience that they're gathering on the job is much more valuable for them, increasing their productivity very quickly. You can also see the more educated workers earn more than less educated workers. So college graduates are much higher than those with a high school diploma or even high school dropouts. So think about productivity here. More educated workers tend to be more productive in their job. Now, it's important to note that we don't stop learning after school. In the human capital chapter, we really focused on education programs. But even after workers are done with, receiving their education, they get that diploma, they're still learning, they're still building experience and skills. So people will get training while they're working for a company. We can break down that training into two separate categories. We talked about this a little bit in chapter 8 and the education chapter. We're coming back to it, the general and specific types of training. On-the-job training is an investment in human capital that workers are gaining while they're employed. So it's literally, oftentimes would be like the first week or two, but even throughout your career, often they will have people come in, during the workday and teach workers new skills. This on-the-job training improves productivity by teaching these new skills, but the nature of these skills determines who benefits most from the training, the worker or the employer. So general training includes skills that are transferable across firms or between industries. So learning widely used software like Excel or Word, improving your communication skills, or mastering the very standard basic accounting principles. These can be used for any firm in any industry. So they're going to be general training. Because general training increases the worker's productivity across firms, not just for that specific firm, the worker typically bears the cost. So they may have lower wages during the training period. If the firm is paying for the workers to get these skills, the workers can then take those skills elsewhere. So the firms really don't have the incentive to fund this general training. Workers with general skills have greater job mobility since other firms also value these skills. General training contributes to a worker's market value, not just to their value to their current employer. So anyone is going to find them more valuable because these skills are going to transfer. Now, specific training is different. These are skills that are only valuable to the current employer. So this might be learning how to operate a company's specific proprietary software that no one else is able to use, understanding internal processes in the firm or knowing exactly who to talk to, or gaining knowledge about a unique product line that only the firm offers. Since the training increases productivity only for the current employer, the firm has a really strong incentive to pay for this training or to share the cost with the worker because the firm is going to maintain these benefits. The worker doesn't have this incentive to leave. They're not suddenly more valuable in the labor market for other firms to try to take away because those skills aren't going to transfer to the other firms. So workers that really build up a lot of this specific human capital and undergo the specific training are often less mobile because these skills aren't as valuable to other employers. So they end up seeming less skilled to other employers because all of these things they developed are specifically targeted for their own firm. And firms with high levels of specific training are often more likely to offer incentives to keep workers within the company and to train those workers. At every point in the life cycle, a worker is going to want to invest in human capital where the marginal cost equals the marginal benefit. Yes, it's those conditions again. Marginal cost equals marginal benefit. As the worker ages, the usefulness of training is going to decrease. Think of an extreme case or two extreme cases. Your first year out of college, training is going to be really valuable. Any experience you get is going to really pay off later because you're going to have 50 years to reap the benefits, 50 years or so, or maybe even more of higher salary as a result of that training and developing those skills. But think about maybe your parents or coworkers who are a year away from retirement. They will only see a year, maybe less than a year of increased earnings. That's nowhere near enough to make a lot of this training worth it. So what we see is that as workers age, their marginal benefit from training decreases because they're receiving smaller increases in wages from that training. They may, well, let me say it this way. They may receive the same size of the increase in wages, but because there's fewer years left, the total amount, the total benefit they're getting is going to be smaller. So as the worker ages, they build less human capital or they undergo less training. They'll instead be enjoying the results of their past training. So here we see the age earnings profile. The age earnings profile is upward sloping. Our earnings are going to increase with age, and that's what we see here in this figure. But we also see the rate of increases slowing over time. This is what we just talked about on the previous slide. Human capital investments early in a worker's career boost their productivity over time. But as they age, these investments that the workers are making taper off. They make less and less of them. They're not going to learn a brand new software program. It's going to take them 2 years to really build up their skills if there's only 3 or 4 years left in their career. So at the beginning of a worker's career, workers are actively acquiring a ton of skills. They do so through schooling, on-the-job training, or even just general learning. These investments boost their productivity and therefore their earnings, and they reap the benefits of these higher earnings over a long time window. Now, the returns on these investments grow quickly. So that's why we see this steep upward slope in the age earnings profile. They're earning much, much more very quickly. As workers gain experience, they reduce their investment in additional skills. So at a certain point, they begin prioritizing reaping the benefits of these earlier investments rather than incurring the cost of further education and training. Again, to go with another extreme example that might not be perfect, but eventually you're going to want to leave school. Someone's not going to stay educating, like stay in school until they're, in their 50s, in their 60s. Well before that, it would be worthwhile for them to start reaping the benefits of those investments and to start working and actually earning a salary. So older workers are mainly collecting returns from the investments they made earlier in their lives, those skills and the trainings that they built up earlier in their career. They're less likely to engage in costly new training because at this stage, the time horizon for the earnings for any new investment in skills is going to be much shorter because there's fewer years until they retire. So human capital investments aren't really worth it at that point. Now, older workers earn more in an absolute sense than younger workers because they've accumulated these skills and experience over their careers. So they're more productive. They have a higher productivity for the firm and their wages reflect that. But the growth slows down because those early investments in human capital generate high returns. And then as the worker ages, they have fewer investments and they're easier and they're not developing these totally new skills. It's just, just a little bit more. So the growth starts to slow down considerably. All right, I'm going to end this lecture here. We're going to pick up with another video and we're going to talk about the earnings distribution and income inequality in general.